Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we dive into the shadowed final days of one of history's most legendary figures. What really happened behind closed doors on his lonely island exile? Imagine the most feared man in Europe, a legendary conqueror who reshaped nations, reduced enemies to trembling, now lying helpless and suffering far from the battlefield. Exiled on a remote island, his last days were filled with agony, strange rituals, and a mysterious decline that no history book fully reveals. What really happened behind closed doors in his final hours is shocking, brutal, and almost unbelievable a story hidden from textbooks buried in witnesses' accounts and physician notes. From a powerful emperor commanding armies across continents to a man confronting unimaginable pain, the final transformation is haunting, revealing a side of history rarely spoken aloud. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's horrific final days, a descent into suffering, mystery, and death that challenges everything you think you know about the legendary ruler. Picture this clearly. The most powerful figure in European history, a man who once commanded millions and made kings tremble, now writhed helplessly in agony. His body betrayed him. Dark, grainy fluid like coffee ground spilled from his mouth. His fingernails had turned a chilling shade of blue, while his legs ballooned unnaturally. When his personal physician eventually cut into his abdomen after death, the sight was so shocking it forced experienced British surgeons to recoil in horror and disbelief. You may think you know Napoleon's story, exiled, defeated, fading away on a distant island, but that version taught in schools is heavily sanitized and incomplete. The reality of Napoleon's last weeks would make even the most battle-hardened surgeon look away, haunted by what the human body can endure and suffer. Though history remembers his victories and triumphs, it forgets that this man, once commanding from Madrid to Moscow, begged like a child for a spoonful of sugar water. Pain had ravaged his mind so deeply that he imagined himself still leading armies, while his body literally decayed from the inside, unnoticed by the world around him. What follows is not in textbooks. These details live only in physician notes and eyewitness accounts too disturbing for casual readers or public knowledge. The transformation from Europe's most feared military strategist to someone unrecognizable was horrific, a slow unraveling that even his loyal attendants could hardly comprehend. Even more unsettling, the very doctors assigned to preserve his life administered treatments so harsh by today's standards they would be considered torturous and lethal. Before reaching the final moment when his stomach literally perforated itself, leaving a hole wide enough to fit a finger, we must understand how he arrived at this point. Napoleon had survived over 60 battles, faced point-blank gunfire, endured the Russian winter, and yet he now faced one of the most excruciating deaths imaginable. March the 17th, 1821, St. Helena Island, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest mainland. Napoleon Bonaparte could no longer stand without assistance, utterly dependent on others. Only 6 years earlier, the same man had escaped exile on Elba, marched across France with a mere 1,000 men, and reclaimed his throne without firing a single shot. Soldiers sent to arrest him had thrown down their weapons, joining him instead. Now this legendary conqueror could not even hold a glass of water without help. The decline began in the most ordinary of routines, bathing. Yet these were no normal baths, but hours-long rituals of scalding water that left him raw and vulnerable. His valet, Louis-Joseph Marchand, witnessed the emperor, once capable of 18-hour workdays, now lying in a copper tub for 6 to 8 hours at a time. Hot water was added constantly until his skin reddened like lobster shells, pruning and peeling as he gripped the edges with white-knuckled desperation. The bath alone eased the raging fire within his gut. Outside it, every small movement triggered excruciating pain, as though knives twisted endlessly inside him. Once a man who devoured meals in 15 minutes, seeing food as fuel, Napoleon now retched at even the faintest smell of bread or sustenance. Inside, a sinister growth had taken root, a tumor the size of a fist, burrowing into the lining of his stomach, hidden from view but impossible to ignore. Not an ordinary growth. A ruthless carcinoma had burrowed over 4 inches through his stomach, coiling like a living parasite, forcing every heartbeat to surge blood into the corrupted tissue. Each inhale pressed the tumor against surrounding organs. It devoured him, silently from within, consuming cell by cell, while he tried to sear the torment away in the blistering bath. By April, Napoleon's deteriorating body appalled those who had faithfully served him for years. Count Montholon, loyal, since Waterloo, could barely hide his mounting shock at the emperor's decay. His arms, once capable of lifting cannon wheels and adjusting them mid-battle, had dwindled to fragile bones, covered only by stretched pale skin, hollow and useless. But his stomach grotesquely ballooned, filled with tumor-induced fluid. He resembled a man 9 months pregnant, a skeletal figure, carrying a balloon-like belly of sickness and decay. When he attempted to stand, which happened rarely, he leaned backward to counterbalance the swollen abdomen, staggering under its unnatural weight, every movement agonizing beyond imagination. The odor in his chamber had grown unbearable, far beyond ordinary illness or sweat. It was a cloying, sweet stench, the unmistakable smell of tissue rotting alive within him. The tumor had started necrotizing even as he lived. Servants burned sulfur and incense to mask the stench sealing windows because the doctors believed fresh air might worsen his condition. The atmosphere grew thick and suffocating, almost tangible. On April 15th, Palm Sunday, Napoleon summoned Abbé Vignali for last rites, his body failing, his mind still commanding. Napoleon, who once crowned himself and imprisoned the Pope, faced mortality with stark pragmatism. "I know I am dying," he stated, devoid of theatrics, calmly observing death as if it were weather. Even in these final hours, his ego remained untamed. He dictated his will with military rigor, ensuring each decision was precise, deliberate, and laden with lasting impact. He bequeathed 10,000 francs to Canton, the would-be assassin of Wellington, demonstrating that from his deathbed he continued to wage symbolic wars against enemies long defeated. Then came interventions now deemed torturous. Dr. Archibald Arnott, his British physician, applied contemporary medicine with brutal rigor, unconcerned with the suffering imposed upon his patient. When Napoleon became constipated, intestines blocked by the tumor, Arnott administered calomel 10 grains of mercury chloride, poisoning him further, while his stomach disintegrated from disease. The first dose induced horror. Napoleon expelled what Bertram called the largest stool of the month, black tar-like, reeking of blood and decay, a horrifying sign of internal bleeding. His abdomen darkened and grotesquely distorted, resembled thick roofing tar smeared across his frame. Arnott considered this progress and prescribed another dose indifferent to its brutal effects. April the 28th marked the onset of mental collapse. Napoleon's once sharp tactical mind, capable of outthinking Europe's finest generals, began to shatter under relentless pain and fevered delirium. But the disintegration was violent. His mind erupted into hallucinations, vivid and frightening enough for onlookers to witness his convulsions, gestures, and screams of phantom command. "The cavalry, deploy them immediately," he shouted, springing upright skeletal arms, gesturing to invisible soldiers, orchestrating battles only he could see and comprehend. He relived Austerlitz, positioning phantom troops against dead Austrians, directing attacks with his voice and hands as if maps of strategy had come alive under his command. Mouchon could not restrain his tears any longer. The emperor was not simply dying, he was trapped in the shadows of his past, reliving battles in a body that betrayed him utterly. At times he cried for Josephine, long dead for 7 years, his voice trembling with memory. Other moments found him in Egypt, demanding water, replaying campaigns decades old, while his frail body drowned in its own fluids. May the 1st revealed a scene of pure terror. Napoleon insisted on rising from bed, knowing full well that emperors do not remain idle, even when the body rebels with cruel pain. 2 attendants struggled to lift him. He managed 3 steps, but on the 4th, his legs collapsed, sending him down in a violent spasm that shook his bloated abdomen. Ali, his loyal servant since the Egyptian campaigns, lunged to catch him. They carried Napoleon back to bed, yet he struggled repeatedly, gasping for the army he could no longer command. "My army, where are my soldiers?" he cried, voice strained and desperate. 4 men restrained him physically as he attempted to lead phantom troops through battles that existed only in his fevered mind. The British physicians decided more extreme measures were necessary. Blistering plasters soaked in crushed beetles were applied to his chest calves and feet, causing severe chemical burns meant to draw out internal disease. The theory was brutal. External agony would somehow force the internal illness to retreat. His jaundiced skin now displayed angry, fluid-seeping welts, literally burning him alive while the cancer ate him from the inside. On May 3rd, they administered 20 grains of calomel, a dose of mercury, enough to poison a healthy adult, followed immediately by a violent enema that humiliated the emperor beyond imagination. Napoleon, who had faced grape shot and cannon fire without flinching, screamed through Longwood House, not from ordinary pain, but from utter shame, as strangers forced mercury-laced water into his fragile body. After the ordeal, he turned his face to the wall, refusing to meet anyone's gaze for hours. His body expelled stool continuously darker and more fetid, each time mixed with chunks of stomach lining. His digestive system was literally disintegrating piece by piece. By the dawn of May 4th, catastrophic vomiting began, blood vessels in his eyes rupturing, turning the whites fully red with every convulsion and retch. Bertram observed fragments of tissue in the vomit, actual pieces of Napoleon's stomach, expelled through spasms so violent they threatened to tear his body apart completely. Blood and frothy vomit mixed with gasping words, desperate and fragmented. "France, my son, my troops." He attempted to speak, even as his organs liquefied, clinging to loyalty and memory amid total collapse. The chamber's odor became apocalyptic, not mere death, but active decomposition, the reek of rotting tissue so overwhelming it seemed to suffocate every witness in the room. The tumor had perforated his stomach wall completely. Only scar tissue adhering to the liver prevented full spillage, leaving him technically alive, though a hole large enough for a finger had formed. Even in this state, Napoleon's mind wandered back to strategy, to lost victories, and soldiers, long gone, grasping at control through memories, while his body was consumed by merciless disease and cruel medicine. May 4th, 3:00 a.m. Napoleon entered the final death spiral. His breathing became erratic, shallow gasps interspersed with long pauses as his brain slowly failed to regulate oxygen properly. Between stifled hiccups and agonized groans from his destroyed digestive system, witnesses caught fragments of his final words. Though accounts varied, and no single version could be verified. Montlon claimed he heard France, army, Josephine. Marin reported France, Monfils, LMI. Burton noted Tet army, head of the army. Perhaps Napoleon spoke to them all at once. By 5:30 a.m., his throat had swollen completely shut. Speech was impossible. Screams could not escape. Only guttural, animal-like noises erupted from deep within his chest. Those legendary gray eyes, which had once made generals quake, were fixed on something beyond the room, unblinking, while an unsettling parody of the imperial court unfolded around him. 16 people crowded the chamber, standing like courtiers not to receive commands, but to witness helplessly as their emperor succumbed gradually to unimaginable suffering and slow death. Desperate Dr. Arnott pressed hot water bottles against Napoleon's bloated abdomen. The heat seared the tumor, forcing him to arch his back mouth agape in a silent, soundless scream. A final brutal attempt followed, mustard plasters applied to his feet to stimulate life. The pungent odor mingled with decay, creating a suffocating atmosphere that made even the doctors gag. His skin, where not jaundiced or reddened from burns, had become mottled purple from oxygen deprivation, every inch of him a testament to the body's complete betrayal by disease. At 5:49 p.m., after 17 relentless hours of agony, Napoleon Bonaparte stopped breathing. No last words, no dramatic gesture, the body pushed beyond all limits, simply surrendered to death. The autopsy the following day revealed horror beyond description. When his abdomen was opened, several doctors were forced to leave, overwhelmed by the sweet, rotting stench of cancer. The tumor had not merely grown, parts had decayed while he still lived. His stomach had become hard as leather, riddled with disease, with perforation precisely at the pylorus as predicted. Dr. Antomarchi demonstrated the whole by inserting his finger. Even more disturbing were the white nodules scattered throughout his intestines' metastases, like pearls strung along his digestive tract. Napoleon had been dying for years. Every exile plan, every escape, every dictated memoir occurred while this internal killer consumed him, cell by cell, stripping him of flesh and vitality. Officially, heart and stomach were placed in silver vessels for burial. Unofficially, Dr. Antomarchi removed rib fragments in secret, preserving gruesome souvenirs, while the British were distracted. Locks of hair were taken. Allegedly, his penis was removed and smuggled, eventually ending up in an American urologist collection described by one observer as resembling a thin leather shoelace. His remains were dressed in his green uniform bicorn hat, resting at his feet. But the real shock arrived 19 years later, when his body was exhumed for return to France. When the tomb was opened in 1840, the impossible was revealed. Napoleon's body was astonishingly preserved intact, neither skeletal nor decomposed, defying all expectations of mortality and decay. His face remained unmistakable features preserved with eerie clarity, skin white as marble uniforms intact. 19 years underground, yet he appeared as if interred only yesterday. The perfection of preservation was uncanny. It sparked theories that linger to this day, arsenic in the system acting as a preservative, secret embalming rituals, or an inexplicable miracle. Perhaps this final, impossible preservation was yet another mystery in a life overflowing with enigmas, a life of battles, conquests, and dark, unanswerable questions. Ultimately, the horror of Napoleon's death lay not only in cancer mercury poisoning or cruel medical treatments, but in the total annihilation of all he once was. The tactical genius became delirious. The man of iron resolve crumbled into childlike weakness, pleading for comfort. The body that had dominated Europe turned into a grotesque, decaying shell. It rotted from within, even while breathing a living corpse of immense former power. His final coherent thought clung to France, and his army not glory, not empire, merely a dying soldier calling for his troops one last time. The emperor who had made entire nations tremble died himself, trembling not from fear, but from spasms he could not control. Today, tourists marvel at his massive red tomb in Les Invalides, admiring carved grandeur. Yet inside that sarcophagus lies a man who suffered unimaginable bodily collapse. He vomited pieces of his own stomach. His final transformation from emperor to corpse was so horrific that even his attending doctors could barely watch without gagging. The emperor who conquered continents could not overcome the cancer in his gut. In those final days, his body literally rotted from the inside, a relentless assault on flesh and mind. Napoleon Bonaparte faced the ultimate truth that comes for all conquerors. Death is indifferent, inescapable, and merciless. In the end, every ruler dies alone and all die poorly. Glory offers no immunity. Power shields nothing. Even the greatest conquerors are reduced to fragile, suffering bodies, abandoned by all but memory, as mortality claims them utterly and without ceremony. Now, speaking of powerful figures meeting horrific ends, I recommend my video on the disturbing final days of England's most notorious king, Henry VII. There, I reveal how his body literally exploded inside his coffin. The parallels to Napoleon's final agony are chilling, a stark reminder that death spares no one, regardless of title or might. And that was the haunting final chapter of Napoleon Bonaparte's life, a story of power, pain, and mortality few have ever truly imagined. If this journey through history fascinated, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories and dark mysteries from the past. Stay tuned because the past still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered.